Hello everyone, hope you're having an amazing day. Today, we're diving into an emotional story where Mai finally realizes she can't live without Khan after he risks his life to protect her. But what happens when the person you're most afraid of losing is standing right in front of you, covered in blood because of you? This heartbreaking confession completely changes everything between them. If you enjoy emotional drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next videos. The small wooden house hidden deep inside the bamboo forest felt unbearably quiet. The only sound inside the room was the faint dripping of water from the blood-stained cloth Mai had just wrung into the old metal basin beside the bed. Her trembling hands struggled to tighten the fresh bandage around Khan's neck, because no matter how hard she tried, blood still slowly soaked through the white fabric. Every spreading stain made the fear inside her chest grow heavier. Khan leaned weakly against the wooden headboard, his breathing rough and uneven after losing so much blood. His face had become dangerously pale, yet somehow he still forced himself to smile at her as if he were the one trying to comfort her instead. "I'm okay." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. The second Mai heard those words, her eyes filled with tears again. She lowered her head quickly, trying desperately to hide the sob trapped in her throat. If Khan had not arrived on that lonely dirt road earlier, she did not even want to imagine what might have happened to her. But somehow, the thing terrifying her the most was not the attack itself. It was the image of blood pouring down Khan's neck while he stood in front of her, protecting her without hesitation. That horrifying moment kept replaying endlessly inside her mind. Mai tightened her grip around the cloth until her fingertips turned pale. She tried wiping away the blood staining his skin, but the more she touched him, the harder it became to stop her tears from falling. For the first time in many years, she realized she was truly afraid of losing someone again. Kneeling beside the edge of the bed, Mai carefully cut away part of Khan's shirt near his neck so she could replace the soaked bandage properly. The distance between them was painfully close. She could hear every uneven breath escaping from his chest. The sharp smell of medicine, mixed with the scent of dried blood, made her thoughts spiral even more. No matter how hard she tried to stay calm, her hands continued trembling each time her fingers brushed against his wound. Khan said nothing. He simply watched her quietly. That gaze only made it harder for Mai to look up. She was terrified that if she met his eyes for even 1 second longer, every emotion she had buried deep inside herself for so long would completely fall apart. "I'm sorry." Her voice was barely audible. "You got hurt because of me." The scissors in her hand suddenly stopped moving when she noticed the deep cut stretching across his neck. If the knife had moved even slightly farther, she did not even want to think about what could have happened. The thought alone sent a chill through her entire body. Khan frowned slightly from the pain while she cleaned the wound, but even then, he never looked away from her face. After several long seconds of silence, he finally spoke softly. "I couldn't just stand there and watch you get hurt." The words completely stunned her. There was no regret in his voice, no blame, only calm honesty. as if protecting her had been the most natural thing in the world. Mai's heart pounded so violently she almost forgot how to breathe. She quickly lowered her head again, trying to hide the tears filling her eyes. But just as she attempted to pull her hand away, Khan suddenly reached out and gently held her wrist. "Stop shaking." His voice had grown rougher from the pain. "I'm really okay." And in that moment, Mai realized something terrifying. The thing she feared most was no longer loneliness. It was losing him. After finishing the bandage around Khan's neck, Mai turned toward the small wooden table near the window to grab more medicine. But before she could take another step, the harsh scraping sound of a chair dragging across the floor echoed behind her. She froze immediately and turned around. Khan was trying to stand up from the bed. The movement had drained the remaining color from his already pale face. One hand pressed tightly against the wound on his neck, while the other struggled to support his weight. His breathing had become faster and heavier, but he still forced himself forward, as if refusing to appear weak in front of her. "Khan!" Mai rushed toward him instantly, but after only a few unsteady steps, Khan suddenly lost his balance. His body collapsed forward without warning. Mai instinctively caught him before he could fall. For one breathless moment, both of them froze completely. Khan nearly fell entirely into her arms. One hand pressed against the edge of the bed for support, while the other unconsciously tightened around her shoulder. Their faces were so close that Mai could feel the warmth of his uneven breathing against her skin. Her heart spiraled completely out of control. "Khan, are you crazy? Where are you trying to go?" Her voice trembled with fear, but Khan only lowered his head and gave a weak, exhausted smile. "I just wanted some water." That answer made Mai's chest ache painfully. Even now, while barely able to stand, he was still trying to take care of himself so she would not have to worry more about him. Mai tightened her hold around his arm before carefully guiding him back onto the bed. But the second Khan leaned weakly against the wooden headboard and closed his eyes from dizziness. Panic immediately crashed through her chest again. "Khan," her voice almost broke apart, "please stop scaring me." And for the first time, Mai no longer recognized herself anymore, because every word leaving her lips sounded exactly like someone terrified of losing the person they loved. The small wooden house remained wrapped in heavy silence after Khan finally took his medicine and drifted into exhausted sleep. Mai sat quietly beside the edge of the bed, with her knees pulled tightly against her chest. Her tired eyes swollen from staying awake all night to care for him. At some point, exhaustion overwhelmed her as well, and she slowly fell asleep while leaning beside the bed near him. Much later, Khan slowly opened his eyes again. Pain still pulsed sharply beneath the bandage wrapped around his neck, forcing him to frown slightly. But the moment he turned his head, his eyes immediately landed on Mai. She had fallen asleep curled beside the bed, one hand still tightly gripping the edge of his blanket as if she were afraid he might disappear the second she let go. Khan stared at her quietly for a long moment. Something inside his gaze softened in a way even he did not fully realize. Carefully, he forced himself to sit up slightly before reaching for the blanket and gently pulling it over Mai's shoulders. But the second his hand touched her, Mai suddenly woke up in surprise. For one breathless moment, both of them froze. Mai's eyes widened as she looked directly at him. Meanwhile, Khan's hand remained resting lightly on her shoulder. Neither of them spoke. The sound of wind moving through the bamboo forest outside suddenly felt strangely loud inside the suffocating silence between them. Mai's heartbeat pounded so violently she almost forgot how to breathe. She quickly sat upright, trying desperately to avoid Khan's eyes, but the more she tried to escape his gaze, the more intensely she felt him watching her. "You should get some rest." Khan's voice was soft and rough from exhaustion. Mai tightened both hands together nervously. She wanted to answer calmly. She wanted to pretend her emotions were still under control. But the closer she stayed to him like this, the more she realized her heart was slowly betraying every piece of logic she had left. Trying to escape the overwhelming tension inside the room, Mai stood up quickly and turned toward the small wooden table beside the bed. She lowered herself to gather the blood-stained cloths and scattered medicine bottles lying across the surface. But her hands were trembling so badly that one of the medicine bottles slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. The soft sound instantly drew Khan's attention. "What's wrong?" His voice remained rough from pain, yet the concern inside it was unmistakable. And somehow, that simple concern became the final thing that shattered the emotions Mai had been desperately holding back ever since bringing him home. She lowered her head immediately, trying to hide the tears already filling her eyes. "Please don't ask." Her voice broke halfway through the sentence. Khan slowly pushed himself upright against the bed, despite the pain pulling sharply at his wound. "Look at me." Mai immediately shook her head. She could not do it, because deep down, she knew that if she looked into his eyes one more time, she would completely lose the ability to pretend she was still strong enough to hide everything inside her heart. A heavy silence filled the small wooden house. Then quietly, Khan spoke again. "If I had arrived a few minutes later today," before he could even finish the sentence, Mai suddenly broke down crying. She turned toward him quickly, her shoulders shaking violently, as if the fear inside her had finally become too heavy to carry anymore. "Don't say that." Tears streamed endlessly down her face. "I was really scared." Khan froze completely the moment he saw her crying like this. Mai clenched both hands tightly against her chest, her voice trembling uncontrollably between broken sobs. "When I saw the blood on you, I couldn't breathe. I've never been this afraid of losing someone before." Every word pierced directly into Khan's heart. And at that moment, Mai finally understood something she could no longer deny. She had completely lost the ability to hide what her heart truly felt for him anymore. The small wooden house, hidden deep inside the bamboo forest, fell into suffocating silence after Mai's broken sob echoed through the room. She stood with her back facing Khan, both arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were trying to stop her own heart from falling apart. But the harder she tried to hold herself together, the more uncontrollably her tears continued to fall. Khan said nothing. He simply stared at her quietly. The wound on his neck still burned painfully beneath the bandages. But at that moment, none of it mattered anymore. Every part of his attention remained fixed on the trembling woman standing in front of him. "I'm sorry." Mai's voice shattered completely. "I really couldn't handle that feeling." She lowered her head again as tears dripped heavily onto the old wooden floor beneath her feet. The image of Khan collapsing onto the dirt road refused to leave her mind. It replayed over and over inside her chest, like a nightmare she could not escape. If something had truly happened to him today, if he had never opened his eyes again, just imagining it made her chest ache so violently she could barely breathe. Mai clenched both hands so tightly, her fingers turned pale. And then finally, every emotion she had been suppressing for so long completely broke apart. She burst into tears. "If something happened to you," her voice trembled uncontrollably, "I really don't know how I would keep living." Khan froze. The look in his eyes became completely still as he stared at her in shock. Meanwhile, Mai no longer had the strength to keep hiding anymore. Slowly, she lifted her tear-filled eyes and looked directly at him for the first time. "I can't live without you." The entire world around them seemed to stop moving. Khan was left completely speechless. Never in his life had he imagined hearing those words from the woman who had always tried so hard to build walls between herself and everyone else. The moment the confession left her lips, Mai broke down crying even harder, as if speaking the truth had finally shattered the last barrier protecting her heart. And for the very first time, Khan no longer knew how to hide his own feelings either. After risking his life to protect Mai from a violent attack, Khan is left seriously injured inside her small wooden house, hidden deep in the bamboo forest. While caring for his wound through the night, Mai slowly realizes how deeply she truly loves him. Khan tries to hide his pain and comfort her, but every moment they share only makes Mai's emotions harder to control. As she cooks for him, changes his bandages, and watches over him while he sleeps, the fear of losing him grows stronger inside her heart. When Khan casually mentions what could have happened if he had arrived too late, Mai finally breaks down emotionally. Unable to suppress her feelings any longer, she tearfully confesses that seeing him hurt terrified her more than anything. In a heartbreaking moment, Mai admits she can no longer imagine living without Khan beside her.